about starting?
Hi everyone, just want to do a quick sound check. If people can just type in the chat. So far this has been going pretty well throughout the conference, so I don't expect any issues, but it's nice to know you can hear us. People can just type in the chat as soon as you hear our voices coming through.
Maybe I'll pop up, and if everyone can hear me okay, that would be great to know as well if no one can hear me.
All right, we are all systems a go. So welcome to Product Sunsetting. Knowing its time is just the first step. We're joined here by Nonie Dalton. She's Director of Product at Galvanize. My name is Paul Save. I'm a Director of Product at IQ Metrics. Nonie, for more than a decade, has been obsessed with building B2B software products that help people get their jobs done better, and is going to fill us in on product sunsetting. And without further ado, over to you, Nonie. Actually, I should mention before I hand it to you, Nonie, that I'll just mention with the chat, feel free to jump in, add questions in Q&A. There will be times throughout the presentation that we can bring those up and ask them. And feel free to be engaged throughout the chat throughout this as well. And yes, thanks a lot there. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. Good to see everyone. Happy Saturday. As Paul mentioned, my name is Nonie Dalton, and I'm currently the Director of Product Management over at Galvanize, who is a GRC software platform for security, risk, compliance, and audit professionals. And the reason I wanted to talk about product sunsetting today is actually it's something that has been a common theme throughout my entire career. Back when I first started being a PM and when I first became a PM, I actually began working on a product that was nearing retirement. I would call it a middle-aged product. So we were doing feature updates, but we were starting to kick off building a new platform. But the product I owned was really the legacy platform for that organization. And knowing that there might be an end in sight really got me thinking about, okay, well, what is sunsetting going to look like? Isn't this going to be an interesting part of my PM career to start at the end of a product life cycle? And there were a lot of challenges that came up as part of that process. And then at another company that I worked at, I started actually just about a month or two before they launched their next gen platform, their new generation of platform. And while I was there, I really failed to recognize the need to create an end of life, to create end of life for that old version of the platform, and really start to really push and build that consensus around how we can move forward. And unfortunately, it led to us really splitting our time and resources across the new platform as well as the old. And then today, I'm actually working at a company that is over 30 years old now today, which means that we've got a lot of legacy. We've got a lot of products that have been around for a long time. And we've also been progressively shifting our vision and our strategy towards the markets that we are working that we're working in. And our ability at this company to be able to let go and make those hard decisions is what I really see has enabled us and empowered us and propelled us into what has been now Canada's latest tech unicorn. If anyone has been following the news, really exciting to hear our company about our upcoming acquisition of over $1 billion by the Diligent Company. And it's something we're so excited about. But I also don't think it would have been possible if we hadn't been able to let go and end of life some of our older products. So talking about product sunsetting, some of the things that I often hear is, oh, that sounds really boring. I'd rather work on new products. Why do we have to kill it if it's still making money? Why, but we've always had this product. It's what we're known for. Why aren't we keeping it? These are all really common questions. And I think what it really stems down to is not really understanding the importance of sunsetting a product and how that can really propel your business forward. And another thing that we also hear is that we are really good, I think, as product managers, we get really excited about it, and we are really good at creating, building, and launching new products. That's what's driving us. That's what makes us excited, learning about new customer problems to solve. But what that means is we aren't always so good at sunsetting products, deciding when it's time. And the thing that you always have to remember is that this is equally important to your growth. And it doesn't matter if you're in a startup or in a company that's 5 to 10 years old, or something that is a company that is decades old. And part of this is really understanding, recognizing when is it the right time, and what are the scenarios that might play out in your organization that might indicate that it might be time to kick off an end of life. So I actually created a little poll because I'm really curious as well amongst the audience here, who has actually sunset a product in the past. So popped up a little poll. We'll let those answers come in.
I'll mention you'll just need to go to polls to answer that poll as well, everyone, but I'm sure you've caught that also.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. All right. I'll give it another 10 seconds as it actually goes through. All right, so it looks like the responses that have come in are about 50-50. I'm sorry if you didn't get quite a chance, but 50% of you have said yes, I've sunset a product before, and about 50% of you are thinking about it right now. So that's great to hear. It is something that's so common that we do as product managers, and it's really part of that entire life cycle of products. So today what I'm going to be covering is really looking at and talking about product sunsetting in 3 key areas, starting with understanding, knowing when it's time, being able to recognize those scenarios. 2, how to build that business case of how, that business case that'll lead to making that right decision. And then finally, the actual sunsetting process and things that you need to consider as you go through that process. So let's start with understanding and knowing when it's time. So the bad news is your product is not going to tell you when it's time. You're not going to walk into the office one day and say, hey, revenues are declining. Our overall maintenance has become too expensive. This technology is outdated. We're not going to be able to sustain it. You have to actually start to recognize those symptoms or indicators that it might be time to end your product. And the first scenario that you might have is probably the most common, some sort of looming obsolescence that's coming up. You've already something's already triggered you as an organization to decide, hey, we're going to be building a new next-gen platform. You might have some new products already in development, but there's something that's coming that's going to make that existing product obsolete. And there are things that's the thing about this very common scenario is that it feels like it's actually relatively easy to spot. In terms of sunsetting, though, it's actually harder to determine when. When do you actually turn it off? So things when it comes down to spotting it and understanding if it is something that should be on the horizon here is you might have something like an aging tech stack, older technologies that are no longer easy to support or build upon. Watch out for things like technical skill obsolescence might be happening in your team. It's getting harder to hire new developers that are able to work on those technologies, or you're starting to rely on 1 or 2 or 3 really key people that seem to be the only people that know how to use that platform. You often start to feel something what's called creativity death, but essentially the ability to innovate becomes harder and harder and harder, just because of the effort that's required to make significant changes in your product at scale become extremely difficult. Being able to keep up with the latest and greatest on security also becomes a big issue. Is your product going to become vulnerable? Is it going to create a risk for your organization, in that it won't be something that you're going to be able to maintain its security for your customers? Of course, maintenance over products. You've got a new product on the horizon. Another thing that I've noticed as well is often you start to have customers, particularly in the B2B world, where you might still be working with on-premise solutions. You might have customers that are signing 3-year deals, and they start to ask, as part of the contracting process, how long is this product going to be? Is this going to be supported? And it's something because they've suffered these experiences in the past where they've gone onto a platform or a version, and then that version has end-of-lifed at a certain piece of time. But as customers start to worry about that, it's often a good question to ask yourself, or make sure your organization is clear on the answer to those questions. If you're working in this scenario, there are a number of challenges as well. So one of the biggest things is setting and communicating and making a decision around an actual end of life date as well. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later because it can be a really hard decision, an almost scary decision for your organization. As well, you might experience really small customer bases that really protest against the end of life of that product. This is what they know, this is what they've used for a long time, this is what they've built their careers on because of it might be a certain type of tool that they use within their particular jobs. And so recognize, you really have to make a decision. Is this the customer base? Is this the market that we want to be in? Or is this something, are we going elsewhere? Or is there an alternative for these customers? And the other thing that you really hit when you're going through one of these obsolescence pieces and you have a new product coming out is that internal perception that the new product isn't good enough. It's not ready for prime time because everybody's used to that product with 5, 10, 17 years of history behind it and features that have been developed into it. And so it's something new and it's something different. And you really have to overcome that perception and make sure that your organization can understand and see that it is market ready. All right, there we go. So I'm moving on to scenario 2. I call this the need to focus your portfolio. Really was torn on what I would call this. Is it a shift in strategy or is it a shift in your portfolio? But it's really coming down to focus. You've reached a state in your organization where there is more than one product. And it comes to a question around, do I need to be able to split? Do I want to continue to split my resources around within both areas or across both product lines or multiple product lines? Now, this scenario is actually harder to recognize and it's more difficult to decide on. And if you do a lot of reading around it, it typically comes up and you think about really large or old organizations that may have acquired a lot of companies. There's a lot of products in their portfolio and it's become bloated. And so they really are trying to make decisions around getting rid of other products. But it's not just portfolio bloat that I see, but it's also something that happens when you're in a smaller organization, a startup company or a new company, where you may have started down with one product. You started going down, focusing on one market, one customer, one problem that you really wanted to solve. And while you were doing that, you started to identify a new opportunity, and you may have created a new product within your market. And what happens is that there comes a point where that next product may be starting to kick off. And at the size that you're at and the resources that you have, you hit a decision point. So you have to look at those products and compare them. Which one is going to provide us, is going to have the most growth going forward? Which one potentially has declining revenues or is at a lower price point? Because if you continue to split your resources across 2 different product lines, especially as a small company, it's going to make it really hard to make one of those products really, truly great. So it's important to be able to make that hard decision. It's not always the case that you have to make a hard decision, but at least make sure you're asking that question. The challenging thing about this is it becomes often really emotionally difficult to go with these products. People have put their blood, sweat, and tears into these products. They have built them from the ground up. This is where they started, and it's a strategy shift. So you have to really get past some of those emotions. A lot of times too, there's a lot of uncertainty. So being able to create a bit of certainty within that, or deciding, hey, this is an acceptable risk we want to take going forward. And then as well, you may again have small customer bases that have protest really loudly. You often see things where organized companies might say, I'm not going to touch this product anymore, and they throw it out into the wild and it becomes an open source product or something like that. That's totally an option for sunsetting that individual product if you want to go a different. Now, the thing about all of these scenarios that I just mentioned is there's one other scenario, which is your boss told you it's time. And to be honest, that really, ouch, that really, really sucks. If you didn't realize that you're working on a product that may be ending ending or nearing end of life very, very soon, it can be quite painful, but it's also a a good opportunity to just flex your muscles and add another area onto your resume where you get to really work on sunsetting that individual product, because it can be quite rewarding to go through that process and do it. often too the case, it isn't something that you could foresee. It could be something like I talked about, a scenario like I talked about previously, where you might have a very bloated portfolio across your organization, and so it's part of the trimming of different areas that were not needed. So if this is a scenario that you're currently in, your boss told you that it's time, you can probably go grab a quick bio break while I talk about how do you convince everybody else, including your boss, that it's time to make it that it is time to make that decision. The other thing about all of these decisions here, oh, Paul, did I see, was there a question?
Yeah, there are a couple questions here, if now's a good time.
Yeah.
So one of the questions, can we assume that product sunset equals product feature sunset?
Oh, that's a really good question. I was going to call out at the beginning. I'm focusing primarily here on the actual full product sunset. I don't want to call out specifically, or what I'm not focused on is what I would call product failure, when a product just simply does not make it in the market and it becomes, hey, this is something we want to get rid of. And it's not about feature sunsetting. This is something we actually do. It's like feature setting is something, it's very much like a micro level or micro version of sunsetting, but we're not telling customers they no longer have access to this particular product. You're no longer going to be able to do. We typically have a replacement. We need to migrate them somewhere. Very similar. It's thinking about a bigger shift of something that is a revenue line generating product that we are looking to terminate.
And have you ever dealt with resistance against sunsetting products?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to address some of the resistance around sunsetting in just a few moments.
Fair enough. Maybe we'll pause there and I can ask questions again at the next interlude. Thank you.
Great. I also just wanted to call out as to these scenarios that I've pointed out, they're not mutually exclusive. You're going to see a little bit of a mix of all of these different pieces in here. The other thing I didn't put on this list, and I made it a choice, is it's not generating profit, or it's not a profitable product. That is something. It's something that you would see as one of the symptoms or one of the indicators in each of those different areas. So it could be a reason ultimately at the end of the day that you decide to sunset, but it's not really the necessary cause of the scenario, because not generating profit could be caused by so many different things. So that is why I haven't explicitly called it out here, but yet it's often the reason we hear why products are sunset. All right, so let's talk about making the case and making that decision and overcoming resistance. The first question asked, or one of the questions asked. So one of the first things that you really need to do is start with the numbers. You need to build your case. You recognize that this scenario is existing. It may be time to sunset your product, but you need to really get all of that data, as much data as you can, to make sure that you're making an informed decision. So understanding how much is this product earning right now? Is there a downward trend in the revenues? Is it at a lower? Is the cost of acquisition extremely high compared to the actual order value of the product? Is there increased churn happening, increased competition, making your win rates really, really hard? How does it perform against the other products within your portfolio? These numbers alone, of course, don't tell you that it is time to sunset, but they are indicators or they would help to build your case around understanding what might lead to, or what might help you rationalize time to end of life that product. Now, the other thing you want to look at is your costs. What is this product currently costing you? If you have a legacy product, you're likely to find that it's got a lot of baggage with it, or it may be a larger percentage of your support time is spent answering calls that are around this particular legacy product. Development is spending increasingly more time on bugs, on security patches, versus new features and things like that. So really understanding what it is costing your organization to actually maintain it is the other area that you really want to look at. And by looking at pulling these two sets of numbers together, you can really start to calculate what is the value of us being able to redeploy all of these resources. What is the opportunity we have if we eventually sunset this product to divert our resources into potentially building something new, focusing on our new platform, on a new market area? Other things to consider are what other obligations you might have. So things like legal. Have you signed a bunch of contracts that said you're going to support this product perpetually for until the end of the internet, essentially? Have you made any certain agreements? Those are things that are going to influence sort of the when type conversations, but are important things to know. And then as well, don't forget about some of those intangible things, those things that are a little bit harder to measure, but some of the other indicators that you might see that it might be time to replace a product, things that are harder to measure. What do we know about the tech? What do we know about that particular market? What are the things that are harder to measure? So pulling all of this information together is a really good start to building your case. And it is somewhere where you need to start, because the next thing you need to do is work on making that decision and making a decision that is not something that you do alone. As product managers, we are putting forward that case, but this is a strategic decision and it should never be done alone. It's really important for you to be talking to key stakeholders in your organization and identifying who are those key stakeholders. You need to be able to present that business case to them and potentially run a decision-making workshop. Now, some of the opposition that you start to hear and often hear, somebody asked about resistance earlier around this, is hey, our biggest mega corp company X, our biggest company with a contract value of like $1.4 million is on this product. How can we ever sunset it? Or, hey, this is what we've done. This is what we know. We don't know how to sell anything else. These types of things are going to come up. One of the things that I would suggest, particularly when you start to hear conversations around or have resistance that really comes up around one or two different customers, is identify, are these customers the exception, or are they the 80% of the customers that we're worried about? Because there's always exceptions and things that you can do to help those other customers. You need to solve, when you're growing a product or building a product, you're not creating that product for one or two customers. Obviously, you always get these key customers that really help to drive your business forward. But at the end of the day, you're also solving for the bigger market, And so you can't let one or two key strategic customers necessarily hold back your decision making or overly influence your decision making. Other things to watch out for as you're making those decision making, going through that decision making process, is making sure that sort of watch out for some common decision making pitfalls. So, make sure that the decision isn't happening too slowly. This is really common, especially when tied together with analysis paralysis, where you might be presenting the business case and people will be asking, oh, do you have data about this? What about this? What about this? What about all of these different scenarios? Because they don't want to make that different scenario. The better you can come prepared in with your business case around why it's time to sunset a particular product, the more successful the decision-making process will be. The other thing is to watch out for that unconscious bias. So those emotional drivers that might be holding people on to not wanting to let go of that product. So we talked about, we've got these certain strategic customers that we work with, but also, hey, if you're trying to convince a founder, it may have been their product that they initially created and built, and it's what they established the business on. If you're convincing the tech, working with your technology team, they have a lot. They're like, well, this is my job. This is what I do. This is what I support. Then there's always those different factors to watch out for. The other thing is to watch out for is you haven't identified who is, at the end of the day, who's responsible for that decision. It is typically, it may be your CEO, depending on your size of your company. It may be your CRO that you need to convince. It may be your VP of product that is leading that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a business decision, and it needs one person who can take accountability for making that final decision. The other thing to watch out for is missing stakeholders. I have done this before, and let me tell you, it sucks, because what that means is you will make a decision and we'll have a decision made, and then a month later, somebody all of a sudden pops out and they start to really put up the brakes in terms of getting that project moving forward, because they weren't part of that initial decision-making process. There's pieces that are missing from it, or they might have really valid reasons why that decision made isn't the right one. There we go. All right. Whoops, I went too far ahead. So one of the things I wanted to throw up here, and I want to thank, Paul, yeah.
Yeah, there's another question. So it's in regards to, of course, sunsetting. Should a PM consider synergies with other products when deciding to sunset them? For example, if the 1 + 1 = greater than 2 with another product.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. I think that's one of those upfront things to be considering. So you may have a product that is actually a really good example of this. So in the company that I currently work with, we have a product that is relatively old. And if you were to look at it purely from a tech stack perspective, or what it was, or how long it has lived in existence, then it would probably start to indicate, hey, it's time to sunset this product right now. But it has a really good synergy, or has a huge amount of benefits and value when tied to another part of our platform. And for that reason, we're looking at different alternatives rather than just killing it off, really looking at the alternatives of what the future can be for that particular product. And so the decision to sunset a product is more less around like, hey, this is part of our product overall portfolio offering. If it doesn't add value to the portfolio, you want to make sure that it's something that it's diverting resources away from your. It would be diverting resources away from your development versus actually helping to build and grow your business. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. It's questions for now, but as they keep rolling in, feel free to keep on seeding the questions, everyone, and we'll jump in and keep on asking them as we go along. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Paul. I threw in here too another example of making a decision and really running a decision-making workshop with your key stakeholders. The challenge with an end-of-life decision is that it really does have lasting implications, and it can be extremely high risk. And so using a framework to come to a decision is extremely helpful. It's not a quick question that can be made on the side. So what I've posted a link here to, it's not my own decision-making framework, but it's an extremely useful one from Coinbase, and I've added a link in here as well, but definitely worth checking it out. It really allows you to keep your decision-making short, unbiased, really make it productive, and it's very similar to if you were doing some sort of risk analysis around something, but it gets all the stakeholders involved and understanding what are the options, what are the pros and the cons, and let's weight those and then make that final decision. So this is a great tool. It can be used for more than just sunsetting a product. It can be used in lots of different types of decision-making things, and it helps to really move the conversation around, especially in an organization that just wants to talk about the decision but not actually make the decision, which can make it really difficult. All right, so our next section we're going to go into is talking about actually you've made the decision, which is fantastic, but how do we actually make that possible? So I'm going to pause here for a second because I want to ask everybody see if this moves. My slide is, I'm going to pause and see if I'm having a few challenges with the slides.
All good. Is another poll you're doing there?
Nope. Nope. I just can't get it to proceed to the next slide.
Yeah, those challenges. That's a good one.
It's a good one. Well, is there any, maybe while I try and fix it out, there's another question?
There is. What type of documentation should you create after the decision has been made? What things should it cover? Legal impacts on other teams, etc.
Great. So once you do make that decision, there's a bunch of activity. And my next slide actually starts to go into a little bit around exactly that question. So who has ever asked that question? Thank you for leading me to that next slide. I am just going to quickly see if I can get the next slide moving. I am so sorry.
All good. Perhaps even if it doesn't go on to it there, maybe even, I don't know, a stop share and reshare from that slide as a potential.
Yeah, is there an easy way to stop share?
Oh, your slides? No, that's a good question. Me not presenting, that's, I assume that was an easy way to drop out of the slides there, but I could be sorely mistaken with that advice.
Okay. Well, instead of me just randomly clicking, let me just try one thing. Paul, if I restart quickly, will that kick everybody out of the session?
You mean drop out and drop back in?
Yeah.
That is an excellent question. I don't think it does. I know I dropped out as a moderator, which is essentially the same as a presenter, another one, and everything kept going. That would be another option. I like the adrenaline rush associated with it.
Cool. I could try refreshing quickly.
Sure, let's do that roll.
Refresh always works, right? Let's do it. All right, I'm back. All right, I'm back, and I am trying to share my screen.
Yep.
All right.
We can see the first slide.
Fantastic. Amazing.
Perfect. Nice.
Like always.
Oh, let's stop sharing.
I feel like we're so close. This would be the perfect example of the worst way to end a product experience, just making it stop working and not telling anyone. Yeah, I'm going to click lightly. All right, so hopping back in quickly here. I want everybody, we've made that decision, and there was a great question that came in around what do I need in terms of legal? What do I need in terms of guidelines or documentation? I want you to stop when that decision is made, and probably actually before that decision is made, and you should have this a long time before you're starting to go through the end-of-life processes. Have you established an end-of-life playbook? Do you have policies in place around how you manage and communicate your end-of-life? What are the stages? Have you identified the stages as an organization that a product may go through as you end-of-life it? So you might hit, typically you would have things like end of sale. So all your net new sales. When do you stop renewing existing customers on that product? When do you announce end of maintenance? When are you no longer going to support it technically? End of any support services or services and support that you would have within that product. How long will the docs remain open? So really starting to create a framework and a timeline around that. With large products, you're typically talking about 2 to 3 years in terms of that overall sunsetting process of it going through all those different stages. But this is a playbook that is really important to have even before you sunset a product. And the reason I'm going to tell you this is the reason that in my experience is that this helps your legal team. This is going to help communicate to your customer. If you make it public, it'll communicate to your customers. It gives them a bit of peace of mind that, hey, I'm gonna have 3+ years from the end of life announcement to the actual end of life. It's going to give the legal team the ability to be able to sign contracts that are going up for 2 or 3 years when they know an end of life is coming. It becomes a really important communication tool for your organization. As soon as once you have that playbook in place, and you should have it long before sunsetting, is that you need to start to build a roadmap. So this is actually thinking about what are all the things that we need to have in place. How are we going to communicate? Who's going to be involved? What are the types of documentation that we're going to actually need as part of this? And it's so critical to have this plan. And this is where all of our product management skills really begin to help us, because building a roadmap for end of life is actually not very different in a weird way from building it. It's very transferable from building a new product. So really understanding how you're going to approach it, how your customers are going to hear about it, what's going to be important to them. And there's lots of different routes that you can go down. The first thing is to communicate frequently, and always be honest. I know it should sound obvious. You've got to communicate to your customers. You need to notify them that end of life is planned. This I actually thought was a really obvious one before I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day about this topic, and I won't name him in case anyone Googles him or finds his LinkedIn and looks at what companies he worked at, but he was telling me at their company where they terribly mismanaged their end-of-life process. And it was done so badly where they didn't tell their customers they were end-of-lifing a particular version of their product. So this is version, but it was significant enough that it required a complete migration of all of their customers onto their new platform. So instead of telling their customers about it, they made everything automatic. They migrated their customers over so that one day they logged in and everything was brand new. It had different capability, a completely different UI. That is probably the most shocking thing that could happen to you, particularly in the B2B world, where a lot of customers do not like change in their software products too rapidly, or at least they want to know about it many weeks, if not months in advance. And so this, I put it in here. You've got to communicate to your customers. But before you do start communicating to your customers, you need to start communicating to your internal teams. You need to communicate to your product team. So you're putting together documents to understand first your position, tell people why this is happening, what the goals are, what's the plan, of what is going to actually happen. You need to communicate to your sales teams. They will directly be one of the first teams impacted as you announce, because they'll be hit by end of sale. You might not initially announce end of sale or end of life to your customers because you have 3 or 4 years until that's happening, but you may make a decision where you say, I'm going to stop selling this as a company, this product. We're no longer to be putting our marketing and sales dollars into this. And so they need to know that end of sale is coming. And this is where you hear a lot of resistance, especially if it's something that many of your sales executives have been selling for a long time, and this is what they know, this is what they're comfortable with, that they're going to have immediate fears around not being able to make their next year's pipeline. Of course, marketing needs to know so they can help you communicate. Your technical documentation team, you're likely going to, as you start to build this stuff out, have inform your customers as well through your docs somewhere. But pretty much everybody you can think of, you really need to make sure that you are coordinating with them. Part of what I like to do is set up a bit of a cross-functional team. You've got your R&D teams who you'll be working with and really managing that product as it's in maintenance mode. Your support team becomes very critical. They're the ones who are going to be handling a lot of the day-to-day, and for them, initially nothing is going to be changing. Marketing is going to be putting together communications, messaging, collateral. Legal needs to make sure all of your contracts are updated, your policies are updated. Sales, as I mentioned, and then your renewals team, if it's a separate team as well, needs to understand what does this mean and what is the impact for them. So it really touches everybody within the organization. Now, at some point, one of the hardest things is picking your date, and announcing that date internally. And so you might have you've made the decision, we're going to do this, you're playing around with a bit of a date. Ideally, you've set that date as part of the decision-making process, but you've got to rip off the Band-Aid, as I say, and announce that date. So I mentioned earlier working for an organization where we had so much revenue associated with that old platform. It was really hard for us to say it's time to start forcing customers in that direction onto the new platform. We had provided various programs to help migrate them over. We had tried to tempt them over. We'd done a lot of things, but I think there wasn't enough momentum to really get people moving. And we knew it wasn't a product issue. It had the features, it had the capabilities. There was something we had to solve around some of the effort, or people just knowing that there was things that we needed to do technically as well to help them move over. But the thing was, because we didn't announce a date, our services teams weren't necessarily interested or incentivized to help move customers over properly. So setting that date really kicks things into motion, or at least I have found that in experience, to really create the programs around making your sunsetting successful. The other thing that I think is really important to do is you announce internally and then communicate your communication dates around when you're going to be reaching out to existing customers. Most recently, when we did this, there hadn't been much noise or resistance or feedback from the organization around the date that was being set. But when we announced, hey, our marketing team is going to be sending out an email that tells all our customers about this end of life date, all of a sudden we started to hear lots of things. And in the result, we actually shifted our end of life and our announcement date all out a month, because teams wanted to have the ability to reach out to customers and talk to them on one-on-one. They wanted to be able to have some good conversations with those strategic customers first, so that there wasn't the churn risk. So for some reason, communicating that communication date really lit a fire under relatively busy teams' feet to really make sure that they were ready for that. And then, as I mentioned as well, communicate.
Thanks.
Now the other thing
now's time for one question, and also a 9-minute timer heads up.
Great.
The question is, are we going to use these client communications to also promote the alternative feature, if there is any?
Yeah, you can definitely do that. So we actually most recently did exactly that item. We had been promoting our new next gen product, and a lot of customers have moved over onto it. We set up programs to help incentivize people moving into the new platform. And with the end of life, we used as another good opportunity to promote and tell them about it, because it's so easy for customers to be heads down, tunnel vision, and not pay attention to the rest of the noise. But of course, they took notice of that end of life and were interested. Oh, maybe I should move over onto that new cool thing with all those new features that I keep asking for on the old platform.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Next is, don't forget about your actual product either. So I've been talking so much about the business pieces around this. There is a period of time where your product's going to go into maintenance mode. And as I mentioned right off the top, at the early days of working on product, really this was where I started to learn a lot about product management. As a junior PM, it was a good opportunity to learn to make fast decisions. It was a good opportunity to learn how to make quick trade-off decisions, know that I had a resource budget. But I think you also, as you start to think about this a little bit more in terms of your plan and your strategy of end of lifing, is thinking about things about how long are people going to be using this product? Do I need to make one more last release to address a couple of issues where customers will be happy? Some of those strategic customers will be happy for about 3 years or until they're ready to move. You need to consider, what is that maintenance team going to look like? Are all the bugs that come in, are they going to be dispersed across the entire team, or do we want to create a core maintenance team? The other thing you want to do is think about, are you going to be just focused on bug fixes? Of course, you've got security patches that need to be applied. And consider, are we going to do some minor enhancements? Usually the answer to that is no, but given that first, are we doing that one big last hurrah around this, so that it gives customers some peace of mind who have signed contracts on the next, they may want to use it for the next 3 years before moving into our next gen platform. And that's really common, where you might have big version releases of platforms, or sort of less of the modern cloud platforms that you might have today. Next, I just wanted to highlight as well is that you need to measure what's going on and monitor your sunsetting programs. No plan that you can make up at the front is going to be perfect. You're not going to have all the details, but you really want to establish, what are the metrics that we want to keep an eye on? What are those KPIs that are really going to be important to me? What's an acceptable churn level? What is migration looking like? How many customers have moved over onto that new platform? What is maintenance costing me? Where am I setting my maintenance to be? You might say, hey, our maintenance is going to cost, we'll spend about 5% of our budget or 10% of our budget on maintenance until this particular time. Are you staying within that level? How many exceptions are coming up as well is something to think about as well. Because I'm going to be honest, there are exceptions that do come up. Some someone from sales is going to have a huge strategic deal that's come in by somebody who's very specific about wanting to buy that platform you're just about or just have announced end of life for. You may want to add a new feature in. So thinking about how do you manage all of these little different bits and pieces that you don't want to get to the point where it's like, hey, we're going to have to manage this forever or allow this platform to exist or this product to exist to the end of time, but is it okay making decisions around what sort of exceptions will be okay for you to support? All right, so that brings me to a close, and just wanted to wrap up with a couple of really key takeaways here. So first off, sunsetting a product might be the opposite of building, but it does not make the work of sunsetting any less important. It's very important as part of as your business grows to be able to make these hard decisions to let these bigger products go. If you're working in an organization with multiple products, keep an eye out for these common sunsetting scenarios because that may indicate it's time to make a decision around that. And start by building your case. Remember that sunsetting is a strategic decision. Include the right stakeholders, provide the right data, use a decision-making framework to help make challenging decisions or challenging group-making decisions a little bit easier. And then once you've made that decision, build a roadmap to sunset your product. Include the right groups. It's very, very cross-functional. Manage your product until you're ready to truly put it out to pasture. And one final note, yes, I have been binge watching The Good Place during lockdown, and it has, I feel personally, it has one of the best series finales that I've seen in many different TV shows, and that is why it has influenced, I think, so many of the slides I've had here today. So, big thanks to Paul and to the whole Product Cascadia team for inviting me here today. I hope everyone found this informative. And I am happy to and would be interested in continuing the conversation. So definitely reach out to me here in the platform or on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to chat. All right, thank you.
And we do have another question here. Should you build your products with an end of life baked in? I think it is easier to do an end of life when it is part of the product strategy.
So that is such an interesting question. That falls under planned obsolescence. Everyone who has an iPhone probably is familiar with the planned obsolescence it feels like they have when they have a new operating system coming out and it becomes too slow to actually manage it. But I think planning for sunsetting isn't the right approach because you're thinking about, hey, how am I going to kill this product off eventually? And if you're developing a modern platform that is constantly growing, it's multi-tenant and SaaS cloud, I would question why you would want to be thinking about the sunsetting versus incrementally, constantly improving that platform over time. Rather be prepared that you may have instances of sunsetting that happens. You have and you know, a lot of people asked about features. Yes, you're going to have features that nobody uses that you might want to deprecate. You're going to have certain types of product capabilities or maybe use cases that you don't want to continue to support. But I think planning for sunsetting means you're planning for a product failure. You're planning for it to become completely obsolete. And that's specific to product like SaaS cloud products, of course, very different if you're creating hardware, creating actual manufacturing of specific products where you want to make sure that somebody buys your next version of the product or the new one.
Awesome. And just so to wrap things up as well, I mean, everybody that's appreciated the presentation, please feel free to drop messages in the chat there. Normally we'd have a chance to applaud and stuff, but unfortunately we can't hear you clapping right now. So feel free to drop lines in the chat. After this, there is a prize giveaway in the networking. Maybe one last question for you, Nonie, is questions that came up in all other presentations, or that I've been in, or most of them, I'll steal it from others. Are there books that you might recommend or other posts in regards to sunsetting?
You know what? I don't actually have a list, and part of it's what's kind of funny about this is I have actually done quite a bit of research trying to figure out how to better sunset my products, and there wasn't a lot that I came across that was incredibly useful. There's a couple of blog posts out there, people talking about, hey, these are steps you got to think about, but part of it is just, it's what I found for me, a lot of it has been just doing it. Thinking about customer migrations, thinking about what is the business case that we need to go through? What are the ways that we can, as a business, support and make sure that this actually happens? And from my experience, honestly, the biggest thing is making that decision to sunset a product. It is the hardest thing to do, and to announce that date. It's terrifying, especially when you might have large amounts of revenue, particularly in the millions of dollars of revenue and ARR revenue that might be attached to that. So getting to that decision, I think reading about how to build a business case, reading how to make how to influence a decision, those are important things that are going to help you get to that point. And then the rest becomes process. And it starts to really start to flow and process, and people get into the cadence of being able to do that.
Great, thanks so much. We look forward to seeing everybody at the next giveaway, as well as networking afterwards. And thanks so much for your time there today, Nonie. This is a great presentation.
Great, thank you very much.